Such an important trip to Washington, D.C. for the Prime Minister this week. Is he prepared to fall out with the President, if necessary, on a number of key issues, like the fact as to whether Zelenskyy is a dictator or not?
Well, I think we do have a special relationship with the United States. This is an important opportunity for the Prime Minister to meet with President Trump and to discuss a range of shared interests. Clearly, national security is a very important subject that will be discussed. We're 3 years on from Putin's illegal invasion in Ukraine, and clearly there will be conversations about the role of NATO and about the role that we can work together to bring the conflict to a conclusion. But clearly other things will be discussed as well, not least our shared economic security and the work that we want to do to improve our economies.
But I mean, he will, I guess, tell the President that he believes President Zelenskyy is not a dictator, for example.
President Zelenskyy was democratically elected, and I'm sure that the Prime Minister will have very good and constructive conversations with the President. We have shared interests in a range of different areas, not least in terms of our national security. We're 3 years on now from Putin's illegal invasion. This is a very important opportunity to have conversations about how we can draw that conflict to a conclusion. The Prime Minister spent a lot of time talking to international leaders recently, and I think he's incredibly well placed to have these conversations with President Trump for the benefit not just of Ukraine, but for our own national security as well.
As you mentioned, 3 years on, the anniversary today. Do you think Ukraine, particularly given the rhetoric out of the United States, is more exposed today than at pretty much any point during those 3 years?
I think the risk, the toll, the burden that is being carried by Ukraine is unsustainable for the long term, and it is extraordinary that they've been able to persevere in the way that they have. The United Kingdom has stood shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine throughout that period of 3 years. Just recently, the Prime Minister signed a 100-year agreement with President Zelenskyy, and that is our commitment for the longer term to work with Ukraine to get them through this terribly difficult situation. It's why today that we're announcing that we're expanding the criteria of exclusion that will prevent Russian elites travelling to London and to the United Kingdom in the way that they have done previously. That is a mechanism which will not only enhance our own national security, but puts further pressure on Russia as well. Later on today, the Foreign Secretary will be announcing a range of new sanctions being imposed on Russia. So working with our international allies, we're doing everything that we possibly can to increase pressure on Russia, whilst at the same time continuing to provide support to Ukraine.
But I mean, economic sanctions, firstly, it raises the question why they weren't done already, if they're really that significant. But more importantly, you mentioned working with allies. I mean, economic sanctions without the United States behind you are kind of irrelevant.
Well, this is precisely why the Prime Minister is travelling to Washington to have these conversations with the President later this week. Our relationship with the United States sits at the very bedrock, the heart of NATO, which is the guarantee of European security. And our commitment to NATO is absolutely unshakable. We are a key part of that, along with our allies in the United States. And that's why the Prime Minister will be in Washington having these conversations with the President.
But without trying to be annoying, Minister, that's a sort of tacit acknowledgement that what you're announcing this morning, unless the Prime Minister convinces the President to back it come the meeting this week, is irrelevant.
It certainly isn't irrelevant. What it is a tightening of the screw, applying more pressure to Russia. The announcement that we're making around excluding Russian-backed elites, that is something that hasn't happened previously. This is something that we're doing now. So this will prevent people travelling to the United Kingdom in the way that they have done recently. That's a good thing, and I think that will make a material difference. The sanctions that are going to be announced later on will put more pressure on Russia. So set alongside the support that we're providing for Ukraine, we are doing everything that we possibly can, working with international counterparts to try and bring this conflict to a conclusion.
President Zelenskyy said over the weekend that he's willing to give up the presidency if it meant NATO membership. I guess two questions to that. Should he have to do that? And realistically, whilst President Trump's in the White House, NATO membership's off the table for Ukraine?
Well, the UK government is very clear that Ukraine is on an irreversible path to NATO membership. We think that Ukraine's rightful place is in NATO.
You can't overrule the US on that.
It's not about overruling the US. It's about working closely with our partners in NATO to have these kind of conversations. We think that actually the security guarantor that the United States could play will be absolutely crucial in terms of bringing the conflict to a conclusion in Ukraine. And that's precisely why the Prime Minister will be having these conversations with the President later this week.
If we look back over time, and clearly hindsight is a luxury that we don't always have, but Marco Rubio said an interesting thing in an interview late last week that sort of implied at times President Zelenskyy doesn't strike the right tone of gratitude towards the West, particularly towards the United States, for the hundreds of billions of dollars of aid that they've received, receives a new batch and then is always demanding more. Is that is that a fair kind of snapshot with some perspective? And is there a lesson to be learned from that on the behalf of the UK and Europe as you approach conversations with the US?
Well, firstly, I certainly welcome the fact that Secretary of State Rubio has met with Secretary Lavrov in Saudi Arabia. I think that was a very positive move, and hopefully that's part of a process that will at some point lead to a negotiated peace settlement. So that is a very, very positive development. In terms of President Zelenskyy, I think it's hard to overstate the impact that this war has had on the country of Ukraine. Thousands and thousands of people have been killed. While we speak this morning, Ukraine continues to be under continuous attack from Russia. The toll that has taken on the country, the toll that has taken on the political leadership is massive. So our commitment has been unshakable throughout the period of the conflict. We're proud of the contribution, which has been done very much on a cross-party basis, that's gone into supporting Ukraine. That's why the Prime Minister agreed the 100-year agreement. That's why the Prime Minister will be meeting with the President this week and has been talking to international allies over the course of the weekend to make sure that we are best placed to marshal the argument, the resource to bring this conflict to a conclusion. It needs to come to an end, but it will only conclude through a negotiated peace settlement. But the terms of that settlement have to be in accordance with what Ukraine want.
Just finally wanted to get your take on the results of the German election. Is Friedrich Merz someone that Prime Minister Starmer can work closely with?
Yes, and I send my congratulations to the incoming Chancellor. The relationship with Germany is a very important one. The Prime Minister recently met with the previous Chancellor. His Majesty the King conducted a state visit to Germany not so long ago. So they are a vital and key European ally. And whilst we don't yet know precisely what the shape of the coalition will be, we'll clearly want to work as closely as we possibly can with our allies in Germany.
Not many centre-left governments left standing.
That may be the case, but let's see where we get to in the future. And what we will want to do is work closely with all our allies, regardless of their political background.
Dan Jarvis, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.